or in specimens which have been hardened in situ, the lips project as thick, cushion-like folds into the lumen of the large gut, while the opening between them may present the appearance of a slit, or may be somewhat oval in shape. Each lip of the valve is formed by a reduplication of the mucous membrane and of the circular muscular fibers of the intestine, the longitudinal fibers and peritoneum being continued uninterruptedly from the small to the large intestine. The surfaces of the valve directed toward the ileum are covered with villi, and present the characteristic structure of the mucous membrane of the small intestine, while those turned toward the large intestine are destitute of villi, and marked with the orifices of the numerous tubular glands peculiar to the mucous membrane of the large intestine. These differences in structure continue as far as the free margins of the valve. It is generally maintained that this valve prevents reflux from the cecum into the ileum, but in all probability it acts as a sphincter around the end of the ileum, and prevents the contents of the ileum from passing too quickly into the cecum. The colon is divided into 4 parts: the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid. The ascending colon, colon ascendens, is smaller in caliber than the cecum, with which it is continuous. It passes upward, from its commencement at the cecum, opposite the colic valve, to the under surface of the right lobe of the liver, on the right of the gall bladder, where it is lodged in a shallow depression, the colic impression. Here it bends abruptly forward and to the left, forming the right colic hepatic flexure. It is retained in contact with the posterior wall of the abdomen by the peritoneum, which covers its anterior surface and sides, its posterior surface being connected by loose areolar tissue with the iliacus, quadratus lumborum, aponeurotic origin of transversus abdominis, and with the front of the lower and lateral part of the right kidney. Sometimes the peritoneum completely invests it, and forms a distinct but narrow mesocolon. It is in relation in front with the convolutions of the ileum and the abdominal parietes. The transverse colon, colon transversum, the longest and most movable part of the colon, passes with a downward convexity from the right hypochondriac region across the abdomen, opposite the confines of the epigastric and umbilical zones, into the left hypochondriac region, where it curves sharply on itself beneath the lower end of the spleen, forming the left colic splenic flexure. In its course it describes an arch, the concavity of which is directed backward and a little upward. Toward its splenic end there is often an abrupt U-shaped curve, which may descend lower than the main curve. It is almost completely invested by peritoneum, and is connected to the inferior border of the pancreas by a large and wide duplicature of that membrane, the transverse mesocolon. It is in relation by its upper surface with the liver and gall bladder, the greater curvature of the stomach, and the lower end of the spleen. By its anterior surface with the anterior layers of the greater omentum and the abdominal parietes. Its posterior surface is in relation from right to left with the descending portion of the duodenum, the head of the pancreas, and some of the convolutions of the jejunum and ileum. The left colic, or splenic flexure, is situated at the junction of the transverse and descending parts of the colon, and is in relation with the lower end of the spleen and the tail of the pancreas. The flexure is so acute that the end of the transverse colon usually lies in contact with the front of the descending colon. It lies at a higher level than, and on a plane posterior to, the right colic flexure, and is attached to the diaphragm, opposite the 10th and 11th ribs, by a peritoneal fold, named the phrenicocholic ligament, which assists in supporting the lower end of the spleen. The descending colon, colon descendens, passes downward through the left hypochondriac and lumbar regions along the lateral border of the left kidney. At the lower end of the kidney it turns medialward toward the lateral border of the psoas, and then descends, in the angle between psoas and quadratus lumborum, to the crest of the ileum, where it ends in the iliac colon. The peritoneum covers its anterior surface and sides, while its posterior surface is connected by areolar tissue with the lower and lateral part of the left kidney, the aponeurotic origin of the transversus abdominis, and the quadratus lumborum. It is smaller in caliber, and more deeply placed than the ascending colon, and is more frequently covered with peritoneum on its posterior surface than the ascending colon (treves). In front of it are some coils of the small intestine. The iliac colon is situated in the left iliac fossa, and is about 12 to 15 centimeters long. It begins at the level of the iliac crest, where it is continuous with the descending colon, and ends in the sigmoid colon at the superior aperture of the lesser pelvis. It curves downward and medialward in front of the iliacus and psoas, and, as a rule, is covered by peritoneum on its sides and anterior surface only. End of section 21. Recording by Mark Roche, Tokyo, Japan.